today's presentation with Jan will be on Agile, and I'm going to give Jan full rein, as usual with our webinars, to take the story where he wants to go. And of course, everyone here should also feel empowered and enabled to jump in at any moment with questions, either in the chat or verbally. Jan, over to you. This is your presentation. This is your show.
Thank you very much, Shane. Yeah, hello and welcome, everybody. I'm happy to have the chance to talk to you about some of the challenges that we are facing when we are trying to bring open source compliance into more agile environments, and especially also pretty, it's more or less the same when we're talking about bringing OpenChain compliance or open source compliance in decentralized or decentrally organized organizations. So take what I've compiled a couple of approaches or ideas that we have seen to be useful in creating adoption, and I'm happy to get your feedback on your experiences and ideas that that we can probably also use to make adoption better and improve progress on these topics. So first, let me try to share my screen because it might be useful. I guess I need with Zoom to give this a try. Start here. So you should start seeing something now.
Yep, it's coming online right now.
Oh, wow. Probably there's one thing that you might be interested of over the course of the last weeks. We have compiled an online open source compliance basics course that might be interesting for those that have people who might be at the beginning of their journey. It's actually all over about, I think, 4 hours of material. It's divided into short sequences, videos that you can just pull through. It's a free course. So it covers the why are we doing this? What is the motivation behind it? Some challenges, legal stuff, combined with some technical stuff and solution concepts on how to approach that. So feel free to join to bring this up, and we are looking for your feedback. So it's cool to hear how you would perceive this. But now to what we actually are about, challenges in agile environments. When we have come across a couple of organizations, meanwhile, some of them have been motivated by legal circumstances. So, for example, in the medical area, and some are more interested from the compliance perspective because they really want to make sure that they are only providing definite compliant tools and toolings. But typically, this is somewhere in the management. It's a central hub, or it's one project that is having these concerns, and that is where we enter. And then there's a difference between the whole organization adopting that saying at scale, or a single project. And so we try to identify what is actually limiting the spreading, or what drives all acceptance through the organization. And when we came, I mean, there is a lot of need for compliance, especially also whether it's security or whether it's compliance, what might be the driver. The important thing is we have more and more smaller projects that are somehow using this stuff and are going to use open source compliant tools to bring out their solutions. And as it's spreading across the organization, as there are more and more people operating this stuff by themselves, so developing and operating it together, the visibility for central units is really getting less. And having a policy is one thing, but executing the policy or giving it a life is a second thing. So there's one thing that we recognize that's really making it hard for these central units to cope with the change is what we call the Agile. It's despite, I mean, many organizations call themselves Agile, but they are still somehow not, it's more concept for not being specific. But even those that are doing it in a correct way still must not necessarily have open source compliance in mind or open source security even. Then we see that sometimes also a lack of good programming skill also leads to the adoption of potentially fitting open source solutions, which sometimes is not a good choice, but it's often happening, and then therefore also introducing new risks or new issues sometimes. So that's one part. We have people that are in the development cycle. We have more decentralized development efforts, and we have a less coordinated or targeted effort here. In the same way, we see that decisions about what is going to be done is more or less decentralized. The projects are getting heterogeneous in the sorts of technologies and so on. So component harmonization is getting more difficult. And often the most important drivers behind these teams is to achieve a result instead of really having a something that is solid and sound. That's giving them a different focus and achieving something instead of really thinking about how in what manner it needs to be achieved. Then what we recognize is when we are in this situation, another challenge is that we see that people are sometimes, especially due to the fact that they are probably not too much involved, or they want to get efficiencies, they tend to reuse things. And sometimes it happens that that there are components that are taken that have been cleared in a certain circumstance, and then they are applied for something without a real understanding of what's in there or why it has been cleared for that case. So it turns out that we see there is a belief of having done everything properly, but unfortunately the circumstances have changed, and people then are facing a situation where probably documentation is not sufficient, or their changes would imply additional documentation requirements or something like that. Even further, there is sometimes we have I mean, I don't know, would be interested to hear, but typically the number of decision makers that can really, for example, judge or decide what is clear, what can be cleared, is pretty low. I mean, there is a lot of competence required, and typically these competences are not widespread in organizations. So what we call the highly skilled compliance manager will get in trouble when he has too many widespread decisions to follow up with. So given you have an organization of a couple of thousand developers, it's probably hard to say how many compliance managers you would need that can make the decisions there. There are many millions of lines of code produced, and to follow up what the consequences of each change are is pretty hard. And especially when you then start running around to really collect information about components that are not pretty common or not well documented. And then finally, the fifth challenge that we saw that's pretty common is that people have to manage, besides what they are doing today for the product of tomorrow, they also have a history behind them. There are components in the field. They have to take care of these components as well. There are patches to be done. There has to be identified what has done in a particular point in time in the past. Today, it's not very common it's not very often that people have to invest much time there, but I think it's something that might grow for need in the future, because the more we are documenting the things, the more we are defining the things how they are, the more interest in what has been will also be there. And that's why I do think it's an absolute essential thing to prepare having the documents ready and being able to show what has been in a certain point in time in the past. So this said, and this have been more or less our observations, and I would be interested to see whether this fits from what you have heard and what you see, or whether there are things that you see that are missing, or where we could probably add things. Probably hand over to the audience. How many actually are we? 11. So probably.
We actually have quite a little crowd today of 10 people from several continents. So nice representation.
Very populated. Okay. So how did we approach this? What was the idea to overcome these challenges? So we thought that the fast change in the requirements environment, so this kind of, we do change a lot the tools. We try with new things. This is something that we could cope with what we call a component lake. So we started providing information and starting to sort and organize this information in a way so that people can not only use this tooling for compliance documentation purposes, but also for evaluation purposes. So it's about starting the having tags, for example, associated with components, so that some of them you can find components faster. Introducing the OSF scorecard system, which is a certain, are you familiar with the OSF scorecard? I mean, Shane, you will be, but the rest of the audience, or shall I explain this further?
Maybe briefly explaining it would be super useful, because it's likely that the long tail of our audience will be quite large.
Yeah, okay. So I will come to this a little bit later with a short example, but to make the long story short, it's a mechanism that has been developed in the form of a CLI tool that can be used to judge the quality or security of a project based on indicators that you can identify or find in a repository. So what the CLI tool will do is it's taking a repository URL, it's checking the contents for a couple of checks. We will see this later, and then building or deriving from that a sort of a score. And this score, the higher the score, the more secure it is that you can use this component without trouble. It's a statistical thing. I mean, it's based on indicators, and it's building a score. And as usual, scores are scores. They give you orientation, but they are not the only thing that you should put your decision on. So it helps to make a choice, and that's what you can integrate here in this component lake thing. And then we also have thought or came across a tooling that is pretty interesting. It's called Technology Radar, probably known for some of you. Technology Radar is an idea to give an organization orientation across the whole set of tools by adjusting them or giving them a certain sorting criteria, saying, okay, these are technologies or things that we want to look at in the future. Those are some that we are really wanting to use, and those are some that we looked at but we are not happy with. So that you give a kind of a classification, and this classification for sure will change over time. And the more you're moving probably towards Kubernetes, some of the Kubernetes tools we get more interested, and some others are less. But these are then things that you can use to judge technology tools or sound of groups of components and libraries, whether they are supportive or not for that kind of direction. And when you have classified this thing, it's another thing that can be added to make choices. So these are tools or methodologies, probably better said, that all together, when they're put into one place, they give a profound knowledge to to an organization and to users and to developers. And that's something what we recognize brings developers to use the tool. So the adoption of the willingness to adopt such a tool, because it gets you information and a point where you're probably a little bit more lost, helps to adopt the other parts. Another thing, it's also about these design decisions. I mean, it's not the design decision, it's the go decision for the approval later on. The integration of the SBOM generation. I mean, we have been talking about CI/CD integration for bill of materials for a long time now. I think it's more or less a settled thing. It should be good practice to do so. Unfortunately, it's not done always and everywhere, but it's possible. Then it's about the legal requirements of each project. There must be a framework that is able to capture these. We have come across this when we were talking about the capability that it's necessary. We have a capability to capture the legal requirements and to evaluate against these, so that the list of obligations that results from these requirements for this SBOM can be determined most likely on an automated base, so that people really understand, okay, I need to do these and I need to do that to comply. If this is done on an automated base, you have fast decisions and fast answers, or fast answers for the questions about the compliance parts. And then there's one thing, we were talking about this reuse thing. It's about this, there's a couple of things there. The first is that you probably also need a release management for your documentation. That's what we recognized helps a lot, because if you bind the documentation, probably using tokens or hash values, and bind these directly to the releases that you have, because they are probably more or less produced in an automated way. They are frozen at a particular point in time, and then bound to this product by probably integrating it using an API that is capable of exposing it into the product. This makes a lot of life easier, because typically we have the situation that there's a binary, something that's coming out of the production process or delivery process. And on the other hand, we have the documentation, and they typically don't really fit together. And if they are bound, for example, together by using whatever kind of an API token or something, then it really becomes some sort of built-in, and therefore not separatable anymore. Another thing that is about this reuse is the linking, creating a capability to link things that have been built in one place, to reuse it on another place. So that the structure that is being created here, let's say in a project that's creating a library, going to get the documentation, and this is frozen at a particular moment in time. It has a documentation with it, for example, an SBOM, and then it goes into another thing, that is reused somewhere in another project, and that the SBOM is based on the release version that we have had, is put into the next whatever that is built. But here we have a new legal circumstance. We have a new legal environment, and now this this produced good is interpreted in this next with the next requirement. So actually, we have this SBOM is going into a new context, and therefore newly interpreted. And the binding of this version that is reused is so important, because this the foundation will develop over time. It will grow, it will add additional features or drop off the vulnerable libraries or whatever. But the other thing that is using it might remain with this library for a while. And that's why it's so important that you have this link, and the link at the particular version. And that you have the transparency about what is where, and that when you can support this, it typically leads to great adoption, because this is a transparency that is becoming vital for those that are consuming components. And they won't get this transparency from somewhere else, typically. And this also leads to a certain need. I mean, when we are talking a small department, it's all fine typically. But what we are starting larger organizations, and then there's one department and another department, and then typically the topic of an audit history is something that we recognize is really a relevant part, because especially when things change, changes are important to be to be followed up, and it makes sense to have a certain kind of reliability on the information that you find here, so that it's not simple to make changes. It should be possible to make changes. It's not about hindering people to make changes, but it's important to notify the moment in time when they make the changes, so that those that have been using something before a particular change will not be surprised by what's happening or by the change. You take questions, yeah, whenever something is unclear.
Yeah, let's throw the floor open for questions.
Seems to be all fine here, what I say. So then we've been talking about the scarce resource of compliance managers, and how to cope with all this complexity that's showing up here, and the many decisions that have to be made. So the idea here is that really a predefined compliance report is generated that is pushing all together all of this information. What is the legal situation? What is the SBOM? What is the vulnerability status? What is the license status? What is the obligations that have to be made? How far are we in the documentation of these obligations? And so on and so forth. I will give you a sample of this a little bit later. Audit trails and hints. So sometimes people are, especially when we're talking about vulnerabilities, it's not useful to patch everything at every time. Sometimes you just want to skip particular things, or silence certain vulnerabilities because they just make noise. And these changes, or probably make a choice about a multi-license component. You make a choice that you take a particular license for that, and this needs to be documented so that it's clear what kind of choice you made. Also, I think it's absolutely essential when you want to have certain accountability for the decisions that have been made, and you want to decentralize these decisions to make the scarce resource of a compliance manager more capable of having a wider support for more projects. Then you also need to make sure that his approvals will be trackable. So it's pretty clear on what base did he made his decision, so that the complete report is part of the documentation. Because if you have the legal circumstances documented, then it's pretty clear that this is the base on which the approval has been made. If you don't expose these circumstances, later on the tool will be used for something different, and then they say, hey, it has been cleared. But actually, it has not been cleared for that particular purpose, because the purpose has been totally different. And to avoid this, it's absolutely essential to have all this referenceable or auditable, that you can later on look into and really say, look, this has been the case at that situation. And finally, there's one thing that we have defined is actually developed or thought about as a solution for these in-field situations. And we came up with a solution that's sort of a portfolio view, so that you see, I have probably 150 or whatever projects, and given that these all are automated by this SBOM integration thing, and you pick a certain point in time, you can travel back in history and see, okay, at that point in time, my portfolio looked at this or like this, and then later on, a year later, we've been at that status. it became something that is really like a magnet for senior sponsors. That was a surprise to us. I mean, in the end, it's not really a surprise, but it was not the aim. But it got us a lot of attention in the management level, and therefore sponsorship. That you then developed a drill down for this. So you see the whole portfolio of things that are available. You see the color is telling you, hey, there's something to do or not. And then you can drill down. To a particular component with only 3 clicks. You're at a particular component level inside the project, and the portfolio manager can say, hey, look, Mr. XY, in your project, this component has been there last week. Why isn't it changed so far? So this is a very powerful tool to navigate towards a particular solution. And this is giving or turned out to give management a very capable, or they felt capable by this tool. It's making them more likely to adopt open source compliance. So these are some of the tools. I don't want to show you now a half an hour through the tool, but I want to get some of these things I want to get addressed a little bit more in detail. First of all, before I start to jumping into the things, are there questions? Is there something where you say, don't understand, or I see this and this is missing, or something like that? Hi, we can't hear you. Could you please check the mute state?
Am I muted? I guess I was double muted.
Now it's good.
Yes.
Yeah, now it's good.
All right. Yeah, question about the tech radar, because previously, I have done some tech radars or been part of the team who's been doing the tech radars. Can you tell a little bit more, like how you, or have you been using these already, and how does it work? Because maybe a little history that what we did like really broad, like tech radars all over the technology, like, I don't know, from AI to blockchain to who knows what, like chips and radios and everything. I guess you have more targeted tech radars here, what you're talking about.
That's right. That's right. I mean, it's not like an industry board thing or real technology thing, because this is something that might be very project or company specific. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's I will show a little bit of a picture how it's actually more or less it's tech based, so that you can judge you can make polls, say, look, these are the tools that we want to, or we have in mind. We want to make a poll about these things, and then the crowd can judge and push a certain status to it, and say we want to try it or we won't try it, so it gets a certain tag, and then based on this key value pair, it can then be put into a report. So it's more the crowd that you're using for running the poll. Is something that is that you can specify in your company. You want to have probably the architects or more decentralized, all project managers, or whatever you take. But it's you can define a group, you can push them a list of components and say, look, which one would you put where, and this is probably the average that's used by others. Where we want to put it.
Yeah, because like with these like technology overall radars, one of the problems a little bit was that, okay, who keeps the radar up to date? Because you first start from the outer rim, and then you kind of go like, when the technology kind of evolves, you get closer and closer to, I don't know, deployment. So that was one of the issues, at least what we had, like, it was a bit like, how to, and who does that work? But I guess you have like better solutions for that.
Exactly. As you just jump in, I probably just wanted to move there. I mean, this is a sample. And the core idea for those that are not familiar with the tool is to say, hey, the circle here, it has 4 circles, and the inner circle is those that we want to adopt. The second then is something that we want to try. The third circle is something that we probably might. So a trial in this sense means I really want to play around with it, so that we are actively using and trying to use it. And the assess is something that we can look at it, play around in software development. Hold is something keep keep fingers off. Yeah, and then there's different ideas. Some of them make quarters because they say we have tools, we have techniques, we have, here in this case, it's platforms and languages. So, for example, programming languages and things. You can have total radars for particular only one sort of thing, like a language or so. That's a matter of representation, but the idea is to give you guidance. And the cool thing is that whenever, the first thing is that you definitely need to classify the things into something. And then what you can also do is, when you have classified the things or the tools, then you can also say, okay, give me an alert whenever something is on hold. I come across projects that are using components on hold. Then it's or unclassified components. Yeah, so this gives you additional order or sort mechanisms, and this is then something where probably a CTO becomes interested, and he says, "Hey, look, there is a project that's totally outdated," or something like that. For sure, this is something that also has to be resolved on a project level. I think all these things, as usual, in our software development world, are very individual. But the idea behind all this is actually, what can I do to make my open source compliance more attractive? Because unfortunately, people have typically other goals than just making open source compliance. And this is actually the idea here behind that. So I was talking about this OSF scorecards. I came across them. It's actually a neighbor project here in the Linux Foundation. And I came across it, and I really I love it. It's just an idea. Here you see, you can find the tooling here under this URL. And this is the sort of tests that are made. It's looking for branch protection. It's dependency update tool involved. It's searching for releases, for vulnerabilities, for checking the contributors, looks for packaging tools that are included, and so on and so forth. So it has SAST and fuzzing and so on. So it looks for a lot of indications that make tool probably more sustainable or well proven. And then it generates a score. And the idea would be that the score then goes into what we've said. Oops, there's something missing. That this score goes into the list of the tools that you then find in the component lake, so that you can make use this as an add-on to your decisions. I think it's a cool thing. They have also they have operated chain. Correct me if I'm wrong, but my impression was that they already have scanned quite a huge amount of projects.
Yes, that's also my impression.
And I was reading something about 200,000 key projects. They have a sister project, which is a very interesting approach. It's examining the relevance of a project for the ecosystem. And based on this relevance score, they are scanning the projects and then shifting or creating these kind of scores here. And if there's a project of high relevance with a low security score, they are offering support to that project. So I think that's really a very valuable approach that they are choosing there. And I was surprised, actually. I'm on their mailing list, and I was surprised about the funding that they are discussing there. Seems like the project is well funded. No clue, but it sounds that the sums they have been using were very impressive. Okay, so we said, okay, tech radar, this is an addition. Then we were talking about this sort of compliance approval thing, where we, and here I just wanted to bring to your attention what we think is all relevant information that should be taken into consideration whenever you do such a sort of a compliance choice. Here's this example. I mean, honestly, I wouldn't have pushed this project into an approval with that many legal issues here. You easily see that there's almost any project or part of the project that is without legal issues. And here we even have vulnerabilities. So, but we see it's consisting of 6 modules, 427 components, and there are 114 obligations to be fulfilled. The notice file currently is at a state of 87% of completion, which is also a bit poor. We have the soup file is not even started in the documentation. The soup file is a notion that is coming from the IEC 62326 or 4, I'm not sure. That's software of unknown provenance. I'm not sure whether this is familiar for everybody. It's getting in this norm. It's required to, when you do deliver software, then it should be documented a so-called software of unknown provenance list, which is then containing information about. Actually, it's addressing everything that's not developed inside your house. You see this often in the medical industry, and then you have information about the vendor, information about the support things, and so on. That there's a qualification that needs to be placed into that list, and so vulnerabilities. And important, I think, here is the status changes. This is something for a compliance manager that he would want to take care of. In this case, he can see that the vulnerabilities are spread across 5 different components. He can get an impression of what are these vulnerabilities, in which components actually they are, where in the path of the projects they really reside, and what has been done with these things. So what has been the status changes? Where has someone said, okay, for example, here for this AOP Alliance component, probably known by everybody who is in the compliance area, very often used, but the project's not existing anymore. So someone has said, okay, most likely we won't get trouble when we accept this risk, and the status for this component has been set to okay, despite documentation lacks and not really having a license. So this can all be found in at one glance, and the compliance manager will receive all this information so that he can make actually the decision and say, okay, I'm confident that this project is not running into any trouble, and the only thing that he requires for the whole term of the project is to look into this kind of report. So with this, it will be very simple to even work in larger numbers than just having a few of handful of projects that you can manage. So the scary source of compliance manager can be leveraged through these sort of reports. Here you see the legal environment, particular obligations that have not been resolved, and so on and so forth. Questions on that?
Hello.
Yeah. Hi.
Yeah, and this is maybe I was not present during the start of the call, but just one question. This is a custom tool that you are showing right now, or is it something available open source? Or?
It's partly open source. The report actually is just that's not part of the open source part. That's currently the solution that you see there in the upper right corner. But it will be we are going to have it open source as soon as we will be in the far enough to have it complete in a way that it can be managed and installed. Currently, it's spread across 40 different services, and we did not have yet an orchestration to set it up in a Docker compose or something like that.
Okay, so you just curate this information from different sources and present it in this way, right?
Exactly. I mean, the main source of this is the software bill of material, and later on the process-based handling. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is the idea that we've been discussing concerning the different levels of solutions, and the problem that arises when you start building platform modules out of modules or of open source components, and put them into different parts, and later on have deployments or deployables that go into different directions. Yeah, so the green part here you see is actually fine, but how to make the legal judgment when it comes to the application of CMN. And this is why we think it's so important to have this differentiation of the contents and the way they are used, whether they are modified or not, and so on and so forth, their license situation, and then later on the legal circumstances the application or the components are used in, and follow up later on in case of vulnerabilities and so on. I was talking about accountability. So it's cool to have these logs, so that later on it's not possible to say I didn't give this approval, or it wasn't me, I did change the settings or something like that. Sometimes you have to be a bit more, especially in Germany, it's sometimes a little bit of a discussion. But so far we were not running into trouble concerning worker councils, because it's not possible to use these logs to make a performance check, or whether someone has done 10 approvals per day or something. But it's something that is just documenting what's happening. So it's not, we were able to get it through. This is a sample of this portfolio overview. It's possible to structure it by different categories. The size is here in this moment based on the number of components that are involved in a particular project. And what you see is the vulnerability state. And when you click somewhere, you see, you go to the down to the next level, and then you see, here is my issue. That's the reason why it has been red. So it's aggregating the colors, and then in the end you can dive in and you immediately see that here's the issue. It's a component that has even multi-license and that has an issue. It has a vulnerability. But I mean, this is just here in this moment. I put it as a sample, so that it's showing how it could be done to really get this kind of attention. What has been a proven tool to provide that sort of attention on a senior level, as well as tools that or ideas that bind interest on the developer level. So to sum it up, we saw actually four things that are cool facilitating the performance of such an initiative. The first is going where the people have their attention, support their needs, and selecting the components, for example, or overviews and insights like compliance reports. We have senior sponsor at interest through drill downs. We have flow control as an additional feature, so that they really you can audit the things and have an approval workflow. Support the complex things like linked modules, and support the life cycle, not just the particular situation when a component is launched, especially when you have then later on inquiries coming, and you have the whole history, and you can say, okay, at that moment in time, it had this issue or this documentation situation, and half a year later, we were at that point. This helps you to really judge the situation that you're in when you get such an inquiry. Also, I think it's important, one of the things to really bring it into the field, to spread it across the company. It's important to create this accountability, making the project owner or the product owner the reliable person for the compliance, so that he has to make sure and giving him something at hand that he can do so, was freeing the open source teams from the hard work and the difficulty to scale. It's much more simpler if you have dedicated this to the people, and when they have some sort of tool at hand that helps them to achieve this goal, it's much more freeing for people and better to accept. Finally, all this can be done without a platform. But when you bring the platform and you integrate the things, you relieve people from doing a lot of things. And it gets also a sort of ease for the people to use it, and that makes it also better accepted. That's the experience that I wanted to share. And looking forward for your questions. Not all at once.
I think you were very comprehensive.
Thank you very much.
All right. If no one has any questions at this juncture, we're going to be putting this video online in a few days. It'll come out next week. And we do hope that you'll help spread the word about this and the other webinars. to your contacts all over the place. Jan, thank you so much for a great presentation. Thank you everyone who attended, and I wish you all an exceptional day.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thanks very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.